and welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. Today I have with me Drew Sechrist. Now, Drew is a serial entrepreneur, a veteran sales leader, and CEO and co-founder of 𝓬𝓷, that helps people connect people to each other to help them make more revenue for their company, increase their sales. It was a cold email to Marc Benioff in 1999 that landed Drew an account executive at Salesforce. He was employee number 36. Drew became the company's highest producing seller and the biggest producing sales manager at Salesforce, scaling from zero to more than $1 billion in revenue. So Drew knows about sales, and we're going to be finding out more about that from him. When Drew moved on in 2010, he was a VP of Salesforce's high-tech vertical, calling on customers such as Apple and EMC. Drew launched his first tech company, Koozoo, in 2010, went on to serve as investor and advisor and chief revenue officer for various startups before founding 𝓬𝓷 in 2019. As a young seller, leaders like Marc Benioff, Steele, Schachter, and Susan St. Ledger transformed Drew's career by opening their networks. Welcome to the show, Drew. It's fantastic to have you here.
Jeff, thanks so much for having me.
So, Drew, you've very early on discovered the power of networks and how they made a big difference to growing a company and to increasing sales. So where did that all start from?
Well, I think the earliest really impactful experience I had on this was, as you mentioned, I cold emailed Marc Benioff and ended up landing this job as employee number 36 at Salesforce in San Francisco. But I was an East Coast kid. I grew up on the East Coast and really had almost never been to the West Coast, I think, except for one trip. When I got there, the company wasn't terribly big yet, but it was a pretty well networked company. Marc Benioff had been at Oracle for 13 years at that point, and he had a pretty good network. And he brought a team of people, Silicon Valley vets, with him. And I learned, very quickly early on in my sales career that if you can get to the right person, if you know the right person, and you can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, we want to sell our product to your company. Are you game to have that conversation? If it's somebody you know already, you can get them to pick up the call, you can get them to take the meeting, you can get them to entertain that conversation. If it's not somebody you know, it's real hard to break in. And I learned really quickly that Marc Benioff had a great network, and I could tap into it because our interests were aligned. I could say, "Hey, Marc, do you know anybody at Cisco that we can sell to?" And he'd say, "Sure, I know John Chambers from such and such." And so I'd say, "Okay, great, Marc, let me type up an email for you to send to John and frame up a conversation with the right people over in his organization." And that just knocked doors open. We could get in and have all these conversations with the companies that we wanted to sell to. But I didn't have any of those contacts. I didn't know anybody. But the cool thing was I had stumbled, luckily, into this company that had a bunch of contacts, that knew a bunch of people that they could introduce us to. So that was probably the earliest, the moment when the light went on, and I was like, wow, this is really amazing that you can tap into relationships like this.
So you leaned into using the networks of the team that you were working with in the company. So, but it's really quite cumbersome, isn't it? Really, the old way of networking, in that you've got to, lean out to reach out to people. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. And back in early 2000s, and you started working for Marc and Salesforce back in around late 1990s? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was right around. It was about this time in 1999. So right around Thanksgiving is when I took the job there.
Right.
Thanksgiving for those of you down under is the last. I think was it the last Thursday in November every year.
Yeah.
So that's about the time that I moved out to San Francisco and took the job.
Okay. We have heard of Thanksgiving over here, so we do read the news occasionally that's global or USA centric, and we're sort of aware that you stop answering emails for a couple of days. Really, we've noticed that as well. Yeah, and that's fine. The turkeys aren't so lucky, but that's fine. So, all right. So, fast forward, you've got involved and started a company called Koozoo as well. Just quickly tell us about that. So obviously there's some inspiration to do that. What happened there?
Yeah, I think so. I always knew that I was going to be an entrepreneur. When I moved to San Francisco, it was to be kind of at the the heart of entrepreneurship in our country and probably in the world at that point. So I went out there with the intention to see how how do technology companies get formed from an early stage? How do they grow? What makes them successful? And then also to build my network so that I could one day do that myself. And frankly, I thought I would do that after about 2 years. I figured I would put 2 years in at Salesforce, learn everything I needed to learn, make some money, and then start my own company. But 2 years in, the dot-com bubble had burst. The economic environment was it was desolate. It was not a good time. Well, it actually in retrospect, may have been a good time to start a company, but it was a very scary time to start a company. If you had a job that paid you and paid you pretty well, you were in a pretty lucky situation, so you wanted to keep that job. So I did. I stayed at Salesforce instead of for 2 years. I stayed there for a decade. But eventually, towards the end of my time there, I had this idea for a really interesting product and service called Koozoo that I thought the time was right, that it was time to start that company. And so I at that point I had socked away some earnings from Salesforce, and I definitely made a great network, and I set out on my own and started Koozoo. And it was largely because there were two things that happened. One is I had an entrepreneurial an entrepreneurial itch that I needed to scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing was I had this vision for what I thought would be a really transformative product at that point. And I just, couldn't stop thinking about it and had to go pursue it. So that was the origin of Koozoo.
Tell us quickly, what was Koozoo about?
Koozoo was, imagine we all use Google Street View, right? We all use Google Maps and Google Street View. And Google Street View is cool. You can look at any spot on the planet, and then you can see what it looks like. What's the storefront look like there? What does that street look like? The idea behind Koozoo was that we were going to enable people to crowdsource cameras that would look out windows, and they would all be woven together into basically a single street view, except live, of all over the place. So we imagined that San Francisco and Tokyo and Sydney would all be visible, not just with that static picture on Street View that you get, but actually with a live video showing what's happening. Is there a line there, lined up? Is there traffic? Are people doing something interesting in the park at that moment? So that was the origin. That was the idea behind Koozoo. And there are a lot of lessons from that experience. We built some really interesting technology. We got some adoption early on, but we did not get enough adoption to turn that into basically what it needed to become was like a viral growth machine, and it never turned into that. So after 3.5 years of hard work and kind of some hard lessons, we wrapped up the company and wound it down.
Okay.
So that was not an entrepreneurial success, but it was certainly there are a lot of learnings in there that I'm happy that I learned, even though I learned them the hard way.
Well, you usually don't learn from comfort. You usually learn from hard times.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure you had quite a few hard times, like it should have been challenges with financing, would have been challenges with getting the right team. It's like, we're not getting sales. How do we do this? Okay. So certainly for me, the best things I've learned, one of the best things I learned in life is you actually almost need to embrace hard times, going, you know what, this is where I learn, and not see it as a bad time, but just seeing it as a hard time that you maybe didn't want or welcome, but nevertheless it's showing up. Okay, so we're now a little bit further down the track, and you have another idea, and I noticed that you've got a few co-founders with Connect the Dots. Now, Connect the Dots is about using technology to help you control and manage and help you produce a network. So where did the idea come from? Because we've moved from 1999 with Salesforce. Technology 20 years later, it's quite different. So where did the idea come from, Connect the Dots? And was was it through your networks? Have you had discussions and then you pulled a team together to start it and fund it?
Yeah, so the origin goes back to the very early days of Salesforce, when I had those first lessons about, wow, if you really know the people that you're trying to get to in a sales process, you are way ahead. And so knowing who knows who is incredibly important. And we did a really good job of that at Salesforce, and I'm sure that they still do to this day. It's just at a massive scale, and they do a good job of helping each other out and figuring out which relationships they can leverage to get into accounts and to expand accounts, and that's great. But the problem had always been, and still is today, really getting a comprehensive view of all the different possible best relationships that you could be leveraging to get to any specific company or any specific person that you're trying to get to. So let's say you're trying to get to the CFO at XYZ company, because that's the person who's going to be the decision maker on your whatever it is, whatever product that you sell. You sell a CFO. You might check on LinkedIn and see that there are some common connections that you could possibly add.
Yep.
And the challenge with that is there are a lot of people who are connected on LinkedIn that don't really know each other that terribly well. They might have met at a trade show once 15 years ago or something like that. And so it's hard to kind of pick through and figure out which relationships you should be leveraging in an efficient way without annoying a lot of people along the way. And what we realized was that artificial intelligence was getting to the point that you could point it at semi-structured data sets and turn that into something really magical that would reveal these relationships, who actually knows who. And the semi-structured data set that we kind of realized we could point it at was email. We've been emailing for a long time. We've been emailing for decades now, and it's been piling up for decades. We got these archived emails that are basically remnants of or traces of relationships caught in amber over the years and the decades now. But people have emailed from lots of different email addresses, and they've changed jobs a lot, and trying to figure out who are these people that have emailed over the course of the past decades, and turn that into a graph of who really knows who, which people actually know which people. We thought we could do that. And so I pulled together the founding team that did do that. And that's exactly what we built. And so now when you're looking for an introduction to the CFO at XYZ company, you just type in that person's name, and then up pops their profile. And then you can see, maybe I've actually interacted with this person in some capacity in the past, because I've emailed with a lot of people over the last 20 something years. So maybe we've already, that happens all the time for me. And then the other possibility is if that hasn't happened, then I can see all of the people in my network who actually know that person and really know that person well. I can see how well they know that person. And I can pick out the person that I know best to say, hey, Sally, it looks like you really know the CFO of XYZ company well. Could you make an introduction? I'd like to talk to him about blah, 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 whatever it is, the thing that I'm trying to sell. And Sally can make the decision. Sure, Drew, I'm happy to help you out. I know you well. I know him well. I think he probably likes your value proposition. Then she sends an email to that CFO. That CFO gets an email from Sally, whom he knows quite well. And so he opens it. It's not spam. He reads it and says, okay, well, Sally, if you really think it's worth my time, then I'll spend 15 minutes with Drew to talk about the value proposition. And voila, there you are. You're on a call with the decision maker of the company that you want to sell to. And you skipped all the fuss, all the spamming and banging your head against the wall. You got right to that decision maker. And so that was the mission that we set out to accomplish. And that is the product that we built. That exists today. You can leverage it. And so if you're in a B2B sales role, I kind of think you're a little bit crazy not to be doing this, because this is the short circuit in your sales process.
So when you kicked it off, obviously you saw it as a technology solution. So I think you're really a technology company. So what were the challenges in getting the right technology, and did you create a minimal viable product, is maybe a second question first? Yeah.
I mean, I would say the challenges were not insignificant at all. So the first technology challenge that we had to accomplish was let somebody connect an email account to our service, and then be able to figure out, resolve the identity of all the humans that you've communicated with. And so an example, Jeff, you probably have a bunch of email addresses that you've used over your life. You might have jeffbullis@gmail.com, and you might have jeff@jeffbullis.com, and you might have
Bullis@hotmail.com is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, your Hotmail account. You might have, we've all had different companies and different over the years, and different email accounts we've created, and those represent the same person. That's you, but you got to figure out how they all tie together into a single human being. Like all these email addresses belong to you, and then you've emailed with a lot of different people over the years, just as I have, and we all have different email addresses too. So like that was a big problem and a big challenge, figuring out how to consolidate all those email addresses into a single person, and then calculate a relationship score between those two people. That's a really big technical challenge. And so it was frankly something we just had to keep chipping away at, because there's no silver bullet to that. It's like there are, a gazillion bullets that you need to fire in order to accomplish that. And so it is a problem that we just tackled over time and gotten to. It's by the way, it's a never-ending problem. Now we're just in the 99% range of accuracy. When we started out, we were in the 15% range of accuracy. So we had to keep working our way up, and now we're in the 99s, and then we want to get to 99.9 and 99.99. So that's a huge technical challenge. And then there was there's the challenge of like figuring out what's a human, what's not a human, because lots of emails have gone back and forth between humans and things that are not humans, and then figuring out how to identify those. So there are all kinds of other challenges along the way too, of just ingesting large volumes of data, processing that data, making it usable and understandable for people. We started out with a small team, and we built a prototype, and we got enough of a prototype running that we could get our first seed funding. We got our seed funding, and then we turned that into a more mature product that actually worked and people could use and get value from, and then we turned that into our Series A. And as we went, we raised more money. We were able to recruit more experts in their fields in order to do the various technical components that needed to be done. And so we just have continued to chip away at the problem and get better and better and better at delivering that solution to people.
So you built a prototype, which was also another name for that is maybe minimal viable product. In other words, it could be shown to work. So are you your own best case study in using it to actually reach out and use it to grow sales?
Yeah, I think today we are, and I think in the not too distant future we're going to be dramatically surpassed by our users, because our users, I have a really good network. Just to put some things in perspective here for you, I have emailed with, across the email accounts that I have access to and that I've connected to Connect the Dots, I've emailed with about 26,000 people in my life. Kind of crazy to think about. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
I can't keep all of them straight in my head. I'm guessing that maybe a couple hundred I know, I really know, a couple hundred, maybe 1,000. I mean, how many people can you keep in your head? But there's this long tail of relationships of people that I can see now neatly organized, and I can see what company they work at and what their title is, and I can see all my history with them. Even, I might have emailed them when they were at eBay 15 years ago, and now they're at Amazon and in a completely different capacity. And I can still see like the context. I can see the complete context about how I know this person. And so I have, of those 26,000 people that I have emailed with in my life, about 750 or so are connectors for me on Connect the Dots. That means I can see their network, they can see my network. That gives me access to just under 1 million people.
Wow.
That I can reach out to. So when I'm looking for the CFO of XYZ company, there's a really good chance that I know one or more people who know that person. And depends on the industry, but if it's in the technology industry, I can usually find a strong path in. I can find like, I know somebody well who knows that person well.
Yeah.
Now, oh, sorry. And the last thing I was going to say is
Mm.
when a company turns us on and goes wall to wall, and every employee in the company becomes a connector for everybody else in the company, then immediately they have a large network to tap into, much larger than my network, and I'm the CEO of this company. So, if you're 2,000 employees, all of a sudden you get 2,000 connectors instead of my 750 connectors. And so, so right now we are very, very successful with being able to use our product to get to the people we want to get to. But I think we're about to be really dramatically surpassed by our customers who are going live right now.
Because they'll have bigger networks then, because data gives them more power, doesn't it? The more connections they have, the more power they have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, it was interesting is that I did a little bit of looking at LinkedIn and looked you up. I hadn't heard about you until a week ago. We've got 5 or 6 common connections on LinkedIn, for example. So, and you know what, that almost happens with everyone. I just like, this is interesting. Look, I have a fairly big LinkedIn connection. I think I've got 30,000 actual connections, and then I've got over 50,000 in the network. So, but I don't use that data very well, and I know that I've got. And then I hate to imagine how many emails I've sent in the last 30 odd years. Now, the other question I'm really curious about is, number one, you've got all this information. How do you represent it? And do you do data visualization? Is it just, I just want to get into this industry? How would you use your tool? Tell us quickly how you use the tool.
Yeah, and just one thing, since you mentioned it, I looked up on LinkedIn your profile, and I see the people that we have in common, and I know one of them.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the problem with LinkedIn, right? I know one quite well. She worked for me, but that's the one. That's the one that I know. Yeah, the data visualization is very simple in Connect the Dots. It's basically you search for a company, or you search for a person specifically, or you can search for a title, and then it comes up with that the thing that you're looking for. So if you're looking for Bob Smith, CFO at XYZ company, it comes up with Bob Smith, and it'll tell you, do you know him? Because he might be somebody that you emailed with. You might, like I've got 26,000 people I've emailed with.
Yeah.
Maybe I already know him somehow. And if I don't know him, it'll tell me, how do I get to him? And these are all the people that I know that can get me to him. And this is how well each of those people actually knows Bob. And the way that we represent that is by 3 dots. 1 dot means it's a weak relationship, 2 dots means a familiar relationship, and 3 dots means it's a strong relationship. So I'm always looking for those 3 dots. If I can find a 3-dot connection in, then I'm like, great, Jeff, Bob Smith. Can you make the introduction for me when I talk to him? And so, it's always up to, this is all social capital. It's all social capital. Like, I can ask you to make the introduction, and you can say, Drew, I'm sorry, I may not be, I'm not interested in help. I'm reaching out to him right now for whatever reason. Or you can say, sure, Drew, I'm happy to do it. I think it's in your mutual best interest, and I love to make connections. So that's entirely up to you. But yeah, that's our user interface is really, really kind of dead simple. Just look for the company or look for the person, and then we show you all the paths in.
Right. Okay. So you've got the data. You're looking for the 3 dots. Do you have templates or best practice for sending messages and how to use or how to build your network?
No. The short answer is no, we don't. But we are working on it right now. So okay. we are working on a set of templates for exactly that purpose, all the different scenarios. We actually, to say no is not entirely true. On our website, we have some examples that you can look at, but we're actually going to embed that in our product very shortly. So if you're making an ask of a coworker, like let's say you and I work at the same company, and I say, hey, Jeff, could you introduce me to, I see that you know the CFO at XYZ company, can you introduce me? That's a pretty simple thing, right? We're both in the same company. We both want our company to succeed. So generally people in the same company are happy to make those introductions. If you are a friend, that's a slightly different scenario. You know, if Jeff, you're just my friend, we don't work together. If you're my cousin, that's a slightly different scenario. If you are a customer, that's a slightly different scenario. And so in all of those things, you need to, there's a like slightly little different touch, you know, to send the request out and make an ask of your network to introduce you. So we are working on that, but you know, to be, you know, technically correct, it does not exist in the product today, but it will very shortly.
Okay. So the other thing I'm really curious about is, all right, so you developed the technology, got a prototype, you then had enough to go and show venture capitalists. How did you go about raising money to basically fund the development and also the growth? How did you go about that?
So we were about to start a process to go raise our Series A, and this was a year and change ago. This was probably like August of 2021, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we were about to go start a process, and but there had been one firm that had asked about us. Well, we were in stealth. We weren't talking to anybody, and we actually ended up they had heard about us through the grapevine, and they had wanted to speak with us 6 months earlier. And we said, we're not ready yet. We'll reach out to you when the time's right. And they ended up reaching out to us when the time was right, or just right before the time was right. And so the partner at that firm, so we raised from Norwest, which is a top tier VC in Silicon Valley. And the partner there was Scott 𝓵𝓻𝓬, and Scott 𝓵𝓻𝓬 had spent time at Salesforce. He was actually a senior product executive at Salesforce before he became a venture capitalist. So he knew the space, you know, the general space of sales technology very well. And when he reached out the second time, we were like, well, it's a little early, but okay, we can have this conversation. And so we had an initial conversation. I said, okay, we've been in stealth. I'll show you what we've got. Kind of pulled the curtains back and showed the product at that point. And you know, don't get me wrong, product is not perfect. It's still, you know, remember I talked about the getting to 99%, you know, accuracy on everything. We weren't anywhere close to that. We were, you know, maybe in the 80s at that point, you know. So there were a lot of problems in delivering a quality experience, but you could see the progress that we're making. We were very excited about the progress we're making. We were very excited about the line of sight to getting to where it needed to be. And so we walked through the product together, and he got very excited too, and seeing that it's quite different than anything that had existed before, and solved a real problem. This is me coming from a sales background, and Scott having been in the sales technology world with Salesforce. Everybody knows that the only thing that your salespeople in the world want for Christmas for real is warm leads. Please just give me warm introduction directly to the decision makers at the account we're selling to. If I can only get that for Christmas, that would be my dream come true. So he was clear that this was a very meaty problem applicable to everybody on the planet who's doing B2B sales. And he got really excited. So we ended up both flying into New York to meet in person. So I was in Serbia at that point with our team there, and he's a Silicon Valley, San Francisco VC. So we not quite halfway, but we met in New York, and then we spent a day going through the details, doing a bunch of due diligence on the product and on the market, and on the positioning, and by the end of that, we both felt pretty good that this was the right partnership. And right. So that was it. That was our Series A raise. We didn't go out. We didn't talk to others. We felt like we found the right partner, and I feel very much like that was the right call. They've been fantastic to work with.
That's a great story. How much did you raise at that particular point?
So let me think. In the Series A, I believe the total that rolled into that was 15 million.
Right.
I think that's right. So bringing our total to Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we, across all of our fundraising efforts, I think it's been about 24 million total at this point.
Right. A lot of challenges with a technology company, especially, and uh, do you? Now, the other question I do have is software as a service. In other words, it's a monthly subscription per user. Is that how you've got the business model?
Yeah, that's right. So we're free for life for everybody. So you can set up an account, and any individual can set up an account and plug in all of your email accounts to it. That's your personal account. You keep that for life.
Right.
If you go to work for a company that wants to turn this on wall to wall for everybody, then we charge a per seat basis for all of the employees in the company.
Right.
But that unlocks this amazing network effect for everybody in the company.
Right. So the challenge then is, one of the challenges I see too is a lot of people, they buy technology, a company buys technology, they lean in, but they don't use it. Do you have an onboarding approach that makes sure that once they've got the product, they use it properly?
We have an approach, and I would say it's certainly not perfect yet. So
Right.
the couple things that we've discovered that help make this usable for everybody on a daily basis is, number one, we launched a Chrome extension that once you install the Chrome extension, then it's there and it pops up, keeps itself up to date automatically, and it pops up wherever you are working already. So if you're in B2B sales, you're already working in LinkedIn, you're already working in Sales Navigator, you're already working in your Gmail inbox, you're already working in your Salesforce instance, your CRM. And the Chrome extension for Connect the Dots is everywhere, all those places. Everywhere you are, it'll pop up in context and tell you, hey, take a look, knock, knock, look at these relationships that you are unaware of that you should be leveraging right now to get into the decision makers and the influencers at the deals that you're selling. So when you're in your Salesforce, instance, and you're looking at Acme Inc., it'll say, "Hey, look at this. There are, 723 potential contacts that you can get to by leveraging your network, and here are the best ones, the highest probability ones with the titles that you want to get to." So we try to make it so that it's foolproof. You can't miss it. It's going to be there when you need it, when you are searching for ways to sell into that company better.
Right. Cool. All right. Yeah, because onboarding, there's a lot of people, like, you buy software and then it doesn't really get used. Good idea at the time, you introduce it to the team, and then it quietly is not used, or just people just, because they're not being encouraged by the team, management, leaders, whatever. So the other challenge for especially software startups is you got two battles that you have to fight. Number one, you've got to keep investing in your tech. Okay, so for example, it's got to get to that, being very, very usable, robust, easy to use, so on. The other battle is actually market share, and that is where, and there's a tension with a startup, isn't it, in terms of how much more money do I need to keep doing both? In other words, keep developing the technology, and that's going to go on forever, because technology keeps changing and the competitors are going to enter the market as well. The other side is, okay, how can I dominate my industry? How do you see those two, and what is your approach to that in terms of fundraising and growth?
Yeah. On the technology side, it's just death taxes and engineering costs. You're just gonna have to keep doing it over and over and over again.
Yep.
To build your product. I think right now, the way that we think about it is, we have a certain set of features that we know we want to deliver, a certain capabilities over the next 6 to 12 months, and then we've sized our organization so that we can deliver those on pace. As far as sales is concerned, there is kind of a holy grail here in the world of PLG software, product-led growth software. And those are, like, Dropbox. Dropbox didn't have a sales team for a long time, and they do now, but they cracked this code on becoming a viral model, where if I invited you, Jeff, to Dropbox, then I would get another 100 megabytes of storage or something like that. And so I would do it. I invited you, and I invited a bunch of other people, and then you got it, and you're like, well, hey, if I invite people, I get 100 megabytes. So you would do that. and it self-perpetuates, and that is an X factor that the way that Connect the Dots is designed, it's possible that we have some significant virality in our product. We see it already to some degree, but it gets better. If you're on the network with me and I can see your network and you can see mine, great. It's all the better, right? And then so I'm encouraged, and it's free to invite people. So we think longer term there's a really interesting opportunity there, but that's not how we're starting. We're starting with a top-down sales motion where we actually use Connect the Dots, our own instance of Connect the Dots, to get the introductions directly to the C-level executives at the companies that we're targeting, and it works like a charm. So I can see exactly who I should ask for the introduction. I ask that person for the introduction. They make the introduction. I'm on the call with the CEO of that company, and then we spend about 30 minutes having a conversation about how they can unlock the power of their network for their company. They're very intrigued by it, and then we're off to the races. We have an opportunity for it to close the transaction then, and that is how we are growing right now. Mm-hmm. My guess is what we will do over time is we will scale that sales organization. So we'll have, we'll keep adding more salespeople that are doing that top-down sales motion, and then we're also going to keep working on the PLG motion to make it easier and more powerful and more rewarding for everybody to invite their networks to participate, because that becomes a viral growth element to how our sales can grow. So that's my prediction, but let's check back with me in a year and I'll tell you if that prediction came true or if I was way off base.
Yeah, because you're targeting enterprise effectively, aren't you? That do B2B sales. So sometimes it's just getting into the trenches to get your hands dirty and just go and get them.
Amen. Yep. Absolutely.
And then after that is, okay, so now I've got enough scale. Can I create it into a perpetual cash flow machine that actually grows? And that's about building critical mass, so it's very interesting to hear your approach to your growth. It's very, very interesting. So just a quick question just to wrap it up. And we're of time. Number one, what was the question I was going to ask? Sorry. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way as an entrepreneur? What are some of the biggest questions that you've had and challenges you face? What's some top tips for other entrepreneurs that are in the trenches, having trouble growing, having trouble building technology, raising money? What are some of the top tips that you've learned along the way that you can share?
So I would say, one thing is just know that it's not going to be easy. So just be prepared for that. You got to love it, because it's not going to be easy. And if you wake up every day and you don't love it and it's not easy, then that's the definition of a bad life, right? Exactly. So know that it's not going to be easy. Just get yourself mentally prepared for that, and realize that every day you gotta fight, and every day something's going to go wrong. And sometimes it's not just one thing; it's 2 or 10 things, and so there's be ready for that. I would say that's one thing. Another thing is, I learned this. I watched Marc Benioff up close for the first decade of my real career at Salesforce, and he was really chill. He was very excited and passionate about stuff, but he was also, you could see like he had this very Zen approach to things. And I think he I learned that early on that he meditated every day. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really even know what that meant. I had to go. I was from the East Coast, and meditation really wasn't a thing back then on the East Coast. And so I learned. Over time, I was like, okay, I'm curious. How does he do this? So I think meditation is really. I learned it. I read a book on how to do it, and then years later, in like 2008, I think I took a transcendental meditation class. So I actually got the official, like, this is how you do it, transcendental meditation style. And I think that's super helpful, because, going back to lesson number 1, it's going to be hard, right? Lesson number 2 is you can look at hard any way you want to look at hard. Hard can mean like, oh no, this is so hard and my life's miserable. Or you can look at hard like, hey, I'm learning so much today. And, this challenge is a fun challenge that, gives my life meaning. And I want to rise to this challenge and learn the lessons that there are to learn from it. and then succeed. And so I think meditation puts you in that frame of mind every day to do that. So I would say, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, be a meditator for sure.
Yeah.
Do that. I could probably dig up some more lessons, but those are two good ones.
I think both are great. Number one, it is going to be hard, but don't let it overwhelm you. And that is where meditation comes in that you've got to provide quiet time to stop. I meditate every day, and it's just something that gives me some quietness. I spend a fair bit of time reading as well, because how do you get ideas? Well, it doesn't come out of nothing. So, but thank you very much for sharing those. I think they're great tips. And meditation, I would certainly recommend to anyone, is that you've got to be calm in the middle of storms, and that helps you a lot.
Yeah. I don't know if you feel that. I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like I kind of sense that you might meditate on a daily basis.
Right.
I can sense it sometimes in just the way that a person presents themselves. And I can also sense it myself when I don't do it, because there are days I don't do it, and I present very differently on those days.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's something I tried for the first time about 35 years ago.
Oh wow.
So I haven't practiced it all the time, but it's certainly part of my routine and daily practice now. So, and yeah, I would recommend anyone, and thank you very much for highlighting it to our listeners and viewers. Drew, it's been an absolute pleasure, buddy. I really have enjoyed it. And I think what you're doing is going to help a lot of companies grow and also make their lives easier. So thank you very much for sharing your stories and your insights. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I've had a lot of fun. Thanks, Jeff, for having me.